Good morning, Leslie.
Good morning.
All right, I'm turning the screen over to you now. So, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you all today, and especially thank you, Louise, for all of your technical help and
Sure.
behind the scenes work on this presentation. Good morning. I'm pleased to be able to share today a slightly modified version of a presentation I gave in June 2015 at the Great Lakes Resource Sharing Conference held here in Kalamazoo. After that conference, Jane Plass asked if I would be willing to reprise it for you, and I agreed. She said they were always looking for programming for especially their academic member libraries. So in order for you to get a little bit of context of where I'm coming from, let me just tell you a little bit about my experience and our situation here at Kalamazoo College. I've worked in several liberal arts colleges in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, both before and after my library degree, followed by 11 plus years in a corporate library, 11 plus years working for EBSCO, and I may have met some of you in my EBSCO travels, and then the last 4 plus years at K College. We are a baccalaureate liberal arts college, and we have about 1,460 students here. We have two main types of funding for library resources, what we call the regular library budget, and then we have several endowed funds. The majority of the endowed funds are for the humanities. We have one big one that's especially geared to humanities. And some of the other endowed funds are more geared or restricted to specific subjects. Most of our library budget is spent on non-humanities subjects like the STEM things and social sciences and psychology and things like that. Let's see here. Okay. I'd like to start this morning by giving a definition of crowdfunding from everyone's favorite reference source, Wikipedia. Crowdfunding, and I quote, is the practice of funding a project or venture by raising many small amounts of money from a large number of people, typically via the internet, end quote. I could have also called this presentation crowdsourcing, which is defined by Merriam-Webster as, quote, the process of obtaining needed services, ideas, or content by soliciting contributions from a large group of people, and especially from an online community, rather than from traditional employees or suppliers, end quote. Crowdsourcing can also mean that a variety of individuals contribute content or help rather than just funds. Today we will look at three largely academic types of crowdfunding projects. The first is Reveal Digital, especially their first project, which is called Independent Voices. The second is Knowledge Unlatched, and the third is Scope 3. Later, we'll talk about some of the interesting types of projects and crowdfunding being used by libraries for other types of resources, not just content, but physical items and products. I'll pause for any questions a couple of times during the presentation, and Louise will make those available. And we'll leave some time for questions and some comments at the end as well. And especially toward the last part of the presentation, I'd love to hear you share any experiences, pro or con, you may have had with crowdfunding or crowdsourcing. Our first experience of joining a crowdfunding initiative at Kalamazoo College was with a company called Reveal Digital out of Saline, Michigan. And their first crowdfunding project is called Independent Voices. Independent Voices contains selections from the alternative press collections from institutions such as Northwestern University, Duke University, University of Wisconsin, University of Buffalo, Michigan State University, University of Texas, University of Kansas, and others. The libraries contributing this content receive complimentary scanned images and the related metadata. Reveal Digital secures the rights for anything that is in copyright, not in the public domain, so that these contributing libraries can display the materials on their website. The Independent Voices collection targets the following types of presses: the GI Underground Press, so military related, the Women's Alternative Press, Native American Press, Hispanic Press, Underground Campus Press, LGBTQ Press, the Right Wing Press, and literary little magazines. Shortly before I saw the Reveal Digital presentation at MCLS, which is the Midwest Collaborative for Library Services, in case you aren't familiar with the acronym, we had a faculty member bring in several boxes of feminist alternative press material she had in her possession. She was asking us to digitize it so that her students could use it. When I saw the presentation of the scope of the Reveal Digital project, I realized these resources would be very interesting to our faculty, and knowing about the feminist literature the faculty member had brought in, I mentioned it to the library director. She then had some conversations with Jeff Moyer from Reveal Digital about digitizing the content we had if it was needed. I'm not sure that any of it was needed, but they know what we have in case there are gaps in some of the other library collections. We felt that the collection would be useful to our faculty and students, not just for history, but also for women and gender studies, anthropology and sociology, religion, and a host of other interdisciplinary studies. What appealed to us about the project was that for a modest sum, we could make the resources eventually available to all researchers, not just at our institution. One of the reasons I was interested in participating is that as a small institution, we often must be subsidized by larger institutions in a consortial buying agreement. And this felt like a way we could give back to the community. Another reason was to make the information freely available to researchers without vendor control, price increases, hosting fees, and subscription models. It gave Kalamazoo College, with a pretty small budget, a chance to contribute to the greater good and to make a set of resources widely available to scholars without the usual pricing whims of publishers and aggregators, and without fighting paywalls. We were able, at the end of a fiscal year, to find some one-time money in an endowed fund and contributed to the project. Reveal Digital's funding model for this first project was that the project cost would be scoped out ahead of time to determine what cost recovery would be needed to provide the digitized materials by open access. There would be an open funding period to see if the project was viable, and two pricing models were offered for this particular collection based on Carnegie class and or type of library. The first one was a 4-year annual contribution, and the second was a one-time fee, which is what we chose. Contributors would be granted exclusive access as the collections were digitized. So Kalamazoo College currently has IP-recognized access to any of the materials in this collection that have been digitized to date. 2 to 4 years after the project cost is met and all of the digitization is finished, then the collection will become open access. In some of the newer collections being proposed now by Reveal Digital, some of them have different funding models, and the collections will actually be open access as soon as the collection is funded. We have also been closely looking at the first two of the newest projects that are described here on the slide and hoping that we can also contribute to them in some way. I've had some conversations with individuals from our ARCA Center for Social Justice Leadership here on campus, and I'm hoping to see if a grant could be used to provide a contribution from Kalamazoo College to help get these projects funded, since the library is in a very budget-careful situation right now. Haven't had success yet, but we're hoping that we'll be able to find a way to be able to contribute to this project as well. If you go to Reveal Digital's site, you can see more about how the funding is going for these and other projects, and sign up to be a contributing member if it's of interest to you. The buy-in on some of these projects is pretty low, and it will help make this important content available before it potentially gets snatched up by the vendors who will be all too happy to charge you for this information at a probably higher rate than this buy-in would be. The Highlander Center archive, for example, contains a lot of early organizing and union training materials that are not easily available in a lot of other places. So it held a lot of appeal for us as well. To me, there are really more pros than cons to a resource funded in this crowdfunding manner. For this project, the one-time tiered pricing was attractive and affordable. The early availability for funders was also a key factor. We appreciate having access to this unique content with no paywalls, and our faculty and students can improve their scholarship by referencing these unique resources. Probably our biggest challenge is getting the word out so that we get the best benefit for the money we contributed. We still need to get and load the MARC records, which will help in promotion, awareness, and usage. Making sure they're available in discovery knowledge bases as they become truly open access will also help raise the profile of these resources. So at this point, I will pause for a bit to see if there's any questions so far.
Hi, Leslie. No, we don't have any questions just yet. So I'll just put a reminder out there that, please ask your questions at any time. Sure. You can type them in your question box, and we'll share those. I'll share those with Leslie later in the program.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So, Reveal Digital's project would be considered a primary or archival source. The next model I'd like to talk about is an ebook model called Knowledge Unlatched. According to the executive summary for Knowledge Unlatched, which was dated October 8, 2013, Knowledge Unlatched said that, quote, humanities and social science monographs remain locked behind paywalls. Knowledge Unlatched seeks to demonstrate that the combined global purchases of academic libraries is sufficient to cover the first copy cost of producing new books, end quote. Their pilot collection is one of the first open access ebook initiatives in the humanities and social sciences area. The pilot collection consisted of 28 titles from 13 major publishers, including Bloomsbury Academic, Brill, Cambridge, De Gruyter, Duke University Press, Purdue University Press, the University of Michigan, and others. The first round of this project had an open funding period, and once it was funded, the books were unlatched, and they became open access through OAPEN, which I'm going to just call open, and HathiTrust without embargo, and they are DRM free. Their model is a cost recovery basis, and the participating publishers set a per title fee they felt they needed to get for each book they were offering in the pilot. The pilot cost was based on a threshold divided by the number of libraries that signed on and who pledged an anticipated base cost. If more libraries joined, the cost per library would go down. Knowledge Unlatched has been very good about sending progress reports to anyone who is interested, and they've indicated in some of their reports that they've had almost 30,000 downloads of those 28 books in the first year of the pilot collection being unlatched. We were interested in the pilot project, but as often does on librarians' desks, the offer got buried under other paperwork and delayed, so we missed the pledging window. However, we now have access to the books anyway, as do all libraries since the books were unlatched. We did express interest in the next round, and just this week we have submitted our pledge to support round 2. The round 2 offer opened in early October of this year and will unlatch another 78 books in the humanities and social sciences if at least 300 libraries pledge during the funding window. Open is hosting the open access version without embargo or DRM and will take care of the preservation, as well as HathiTrust is also participating. The publishers of these books may also host their own books on their own platforms. The initial collection has also been made discoverable by MARC Records, the Directory of Open Access Books, WorldCat, EBSCO Discovery Service, OCLC WorldShare Management, Summon, and Primo Central, so the books should be able to be found by users. Knowledge Unlatched is also hoping to make counter-compliant usage data available as long as their partners can handle the provision of that data. Again, I think the pros generally outweigh any cons, but your organization would need to have the funds available to commit to the pledge campaign. In our instance, what we did was we split the cost between our library budget for the non-humanities items and the endowed funds for humanities items, and we've encumbered those funds in our regular book budget allocation. Once the unlocking threshold is reached, the books immediately become open access with no embargo again, and they're DRM free. Humanities and social sciences monographs have been a little slower to publish in open access models than the STEM fields, so this is a positive move for scholarship in these fields. The publishers in the initial pilot had also agreed to accept any separate print or online purchases a library had already made as counting toward the unlatching fee threshold, and I believe they're making the same offer in the round 2 offer. The potential downside to funding this type of model may be, as with any acquired collection, that those books may not be needed or used. Although the collection is in the knowledge bases of discovery services, some libraries may still also want to download MARC records, and that may be easier for some libraries than others depending on their situation. Some of the benefits to the publishers for the Knowledge Unlatched model are that publishers can learn what might happen if their book is provided open access, so they get a little more experience in knowing how open access is going to work. The author pays open access model isn't often effective or as practical for books, and the aggregation of demand for publishers means that they recover the cost to publish the book more quickly than they might if they were just publishing it in a traditional manner. The benefits for academic libraries are a greater exposure to humanities and social sciences titles, in addition to the higher uptake of science open access monographs. Access to more titles also benefits scholars regardless of their institution's ability to collect in these areas, and the monograph content is now widely available. What is Unlatched planning next? As I mentioned earlier, round 2 was announced early October. The maximum cost to pledge for the entire collection is $3,891 for 78 books, which breaks down to about $50 a book. And from some of these kind of publishers, that might be more of an average, might be even less expensive than some of their other publications. This time, they are also offering the possibility of pledging for smaller, subject-oriented collections. If more than the requisite number of libraries pledge, the cost will decrease for everyone who has pledged into the project. Knowledge Unlatched is also working on more metrics to study how the collections are used, to develop a library role in governance for the steering committee and the collection committee, and they're trying to work on expanding their title offerings with additional publishers. So at this point, we'll pause here to see if there's any questions about this model, or if anybody thought of a question about the first one.
Hi, Leslie. No questions. So you must be very thorough in all of your explanations.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Well, you can always take them later.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks.
So, all right. So let's now move on to an e-journal model of a crowdfunding initiative called SCOAP3, SCOAP3. The Sponsoring Consortium for Open Access Publishing in Particle Physics, which is one of the reasons Scope 3 is a lot easier to say. So the third model I'd like to talk about, and this one will be more brief, is Scope 3. And this model is briefer because this is an offering we heard about in our state consortium but didn't pursue. It's a journal open access model for a narrow field, high energy particle physics. And it has a quite different funding model and purpose than the other two that we've looked at so far. According to an article by Kimberly Douglas, which is referenced in the bibliography, Scope 3's model, quote, redirects institutional journal subscription dollars through an international consortium to pay for peer review management, editing and formatting services, and ensures authors' rights for open reuse and sharing of published papers, end quote. Countries join the Scope 3 consortium and contribute a level commensurate with the number of their publications in the field. The U.S., at the beginning of this project, which was 2 or 3 years ago, contributed about 25% of the budget. In this model, the authors of these high-energy physics articles commit to publishing in Scope 3 journals. The publishers commit to a transparent bidding process to publish them, and the subscribing institutions, like libraries or agencies, for example, send their subscription dollars through the consortium, which oversees the process. The Scope 3 repository, which holds these documents or these articles, includes PDF versions, the PDF-A version, which is the ISO standardized version of PDA, and XML published under Creative Commons BY licenses, which is the attribution license. Metadata is available under the CC0 license, which is public domain, freeing content globally without restrictions. The articles include digital object identifiers and the ORCID credentials of authors when they're available. The benefits of this model are that the authors in the field do not need to pay fees or use grant monies as often as required to publish open access, to publish their articles for them to be published as open access. Countries around the world contribute based on their output, so costs are not as burdensome for countries without high output in the field. And generally, the costs to the subscribing libraries are reduced. The downsides to the model can be that it is a fairly narrow field of study, which is why we didn't participate. We hadn't subscribed to any of the journals in the project prior to the offering, so it didn't really make a lot of sense for us. The libraries are still paying something for those subscriptions at this time, but there are concerns that if libraries continue to be budget-strapped, will they pull out of the model since the content will become open access, and will the model then fall apart? The American Physical Society was an initial participant publisher, but they pulled out of Scope 3 as they were concerned about long-term stability of the model and maintaining their revenue. However, other publishers have since joined the initial profile. APS was concerned that libraries would pull out their subscription funding support as things became open access, and it's a valid concern, especially when budgets are stretched thin. To sum up so far, the previous examples have been specifically concerned with electronic resources. So let's move now to more crowdfunding examples that aren't necessarily for library research resources, but for other kinds of projects. These next projects may be crowdfunded and/or crowdsourced. Crowdsourcing often means that participants are contributing content or indexing or metadata or in some other way sharing their expertise. One of the larger and early crowdfunding sites is Kickstarter. I'm sure most of you have heard of Kickstarter in some way. Kickstarter requires that you meet funding levels to get funding. So good planning, marketing, and promotion will be crucial to funding success. Kickstarter now has a tag for library, but not a category like they do for other types of projects. A cursory look recently highlighted a lot of little free library campaigns, but also some books, some e-journals, some blogs, and some other interesting projects that were kind of cool. So if you go on Kickstarter, search for library, you may find some examples of things that that you might want to consider. One of the coolest gadgets for library recently funded, shown here on the screen, is Library Box 2.0, produced by Jason Griffey. His technology, which was widely funded, is described as, quote, share files with anyone, anywhere, off the internet, even off the power grid with Library Box, end quote. So that was a really cool and interesting project to look at. Hope Lemon, and I'm not sure if I pronounced her name properly, Hope Lemon's article called Crowdfunding, What's in It for Us as Librarians, published in infotoday.com December of 2013, is a good source, even though it's 2 years old, for what libraries should look for and what pitfalls to avoid if they decide to launch a crowdfunding initiative. She's included many of the examples I've shown here. Some of the other crowdfunding sources I'm aware of are shown on this slide. The first one, Indiegogo.com, is also an early crowdfunding player. And this site has two funding models, fixed or flexible. Unlike Kickstarter.com, a requester may not need to meet the full funding levels to get their funding. Kickstarter's model is that if you don't reach the threshold, you don't get the money. The second one is called Unglueit, and it is an ebook funder, and they did a soft launch at ALA 2012 midwinter. This Unglueit site is designed to encourage authors and publishers to publish their works with Creative Commons licensing. They accomplish this by setting a funding threshold and a time frame to fund the book, and if the funding is met by supporters within the time frame, the book is unglued. A newer Buy to Unglue model was released in 2014, in which ebook purchases and downloads instead of pledges became the mechanism for funding. So they may still have those two models. Each title has a Creative Commons license set to go off, like a timer, at a predetermined date, after which the book is fully open access. More purchases in this model move the unglue date sooner than the time frame. The third one listed here, Open, which is the Open Access Publishing in European Networks, is a European-based open access platform for monographs primarily in the humanities and social sciences. The fourth one, Directory of Open Access Books, is another collection of open access books which you're probably familiar with. It's the ebook counterpart to the DOAJ, Directory of Open Access Journals. The last one listed, and I'm sure there are many more, but these are some of the main ones that I had been looking at, is GoFundMe, and this is more recent. Their website says it's the #1 funding site, is a more recent crowdfunding site. I just looked today, and it's a little hard to find their search screen sometimes, but it could be a source for raising money for a specific project like technology or some other one-time funding need. What I was seeing today was a lot of classroom libraries and little free libraries, and I didn't look in much detail, but there may be some other projects in there. GoFundMe says they deduct a 5% fee from each donation, probably to fund their company, and a 3% processing fee. So those kinds of fees are good to keep in mind if you're looking into a project such as this. So at this point, I would like to get any questions that you may have thought of on anything previous, but I would also like to know if your library has participated in any sort of crowdfunding projects, and if so, what? Have you used or joined any of the models that I've spoken about? What kinds of models would you find most useful in an academic library especially? And what other kinds of projects do you think you might consider funding in a crowdsourced manner? Maybe you also have some success stories, some horror stories, or cautionary tales you want to share with the rest of us so that we can all benefit. Louise, have we got anything so far?
We do. We have one question. While everyone's thinking about your discussion questions there, I'll toss this out. This is back from when you were talking about was it Knowledge Unlatched?
Yes.
Okay. So the question said, was you mentioned something about counter compliance issues.
Yes.
So could you clarify that a little bit?
Counter compliance is a uniform way of providing usage statistics for electronic resources. It applies to both e-journals and e-books and databases, and it means that when you are getting use statistics from various publishers and e-journal platforms and things like that, they are all, if the publisher is counter compliant, your statistics will be comparing apples to apples more often than apples to oranges. Does that help you understand? Did I explain it well enough?
Yeah, we'll see if it was Peggy who asked. So
Okay.
if we need further clarification, Peggy, please let us know.
It's a really huge benefit to have counter-compliant statistics so that you don't have to do all kinds of gyrations with your usage stats when you're trying to tell your administration what's being used and what's not. And it helps you calculate cost per use on resources to make better decisions about what to keep and what to ditch.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay, she said yes, that clarified her
Okay,
question.
good.
So thank you.
And I encourage you, if you have a publisher who doesn't have counter-compliant version 4, encourage them, because it saves you a lot of crazy time.
Okay. Well, let's see. Another question. Could you please explain is it CC0 requirement or CCO requirement?
Yeah. The metadata for the articles in Scope 3, they're providing that indexing information so that anybody can use that metadata. You don't have to license that metadata. You can pretty much use it however you want. It's considered public domain. If you look at the Creative Commons website, they will describe that. I just searched it on Wikipedia. I think Wikipedia even described, or that the CC0 means it's freely available. It's in the public domain.
Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions at this point. You know, I'll kind of. I guess I have a couple questions. Oh wait,
Okay.
there's a follow-up as to your metadata question. So so she asks, is that only metadata and not the digitized object?
Correct. Well, once those articles are published, they are in the public domain, but the actual articles themselves are controlled by the CC BY license, which means you can use that article with attribution.
Mm-hmm.
So once those articles are published, they are in the public domain. I mean, they're available as open access articles, and you may use them so people can share them around. They can quote from them, but they're governed by a Creative Commons license that says that you must attribute the author or that article.
Okay.
Does that explain?
We'll see. That was Judith. If Judith needs more. Oh, yes, she said yes. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Great. Well, I guess my question for you is, I find this quite interesting. I've worked in academic and both public libraries, and as courses budgets are getting tighter and tighter, it's, there's a lot of creative things being done, and I think that's very exciting. And I know with your presentation today, it was from an academic perspective, but I know in our audience we have some people from public libraries. Are you aware of any, as you've been talking to people, are you aware of any crowdfunding projects that have happened in public libraries?
The ones that I have seen the most of for public libraries, I'm not sure. The public libraries might be interested in some of the content that Reveal Digital has, depending on what kind of a collection they have or how large they are. Whether they would be interested in some of the ebook collections, I'm not so sure about, but there may come a point where there are new initiatives that would deal with books for public libraries, but I'm not aware of any yet.
Okay.
Where I've seen the public libraries most use crowdfunding is in the area of the last section of this presentation where we talked about the Kickstarter campaigns, the GoFundMe campaigns, Indiegogo, those kinds of things where they may be trying to raise money for a specific one-time project. Maybe it's new signage out in front of their library, or maybe the friends are trying to raise money to purchase a collection, or they're raising money to digitize a special collection or a local history collection that they have in their possession. So that's where I've seen most of the public library action, is in those crowdfunding internet kinds of sites, as opposed to buying e-resources per se.
Okay, thank you. And I guess one other question that comes to my mind too, with your projects at Kalamazoo, have you partnered with other colleges or universities on your e-resources for crowdfunding, or have you considered that?
We kind of considered it, because some of these were offered through our consortium, MCLS. So when we meet as academic e-resource librarians, those offers are presented, and then some people buy in and some people don't, based on, so we have other libraries that do this. We haven't yet done this for these particular resources, but some of the groups that we are part of, we're also part of the Oberlin group of libraries, and we are part of the Great Lakes Colleges Association. So in some cases we might consider getting a group together to fund something like this, but so far those types of cooperation have been to negotiate a consortial price for a published resource from a vendor or provider, as opposed to an open access initiative at this point.
Okay. Great.
But that's something that we certainly will keep looking at and talking with each other about. And in some cases, a lot of the there are several libraries in Michigan who did sign on to Scope 3 because they actually subscribe to those journals. And had we subscribed to them, we probably would have joined as well, but we would have ended up having to pay more than we would have been paying, because we didn't subscribe to those journals in the first place.
Sure.
So I'm just curious if anybody who's on the presentation has actually done any crowdfunding in their library for any sort of resources.
All right, we'll give them a minute or two to answer.
Or maybe this is all new information.
It could be. Have you found, Leslie, are your students and faculty, are they using the resources? Are they?
They likely are, but it's a little hard to tell at the moment. We need to do some more promotion for some of them, and we need to do, I need to get the MARC records loaded so that they're more obvious in our collection. The Knowledge Unlatched ones, I believe, are in our discovery service, so whether or not they're being found yet is too soon to know at this point. But I will keep monitoring that and keep promoting them as we go through.
All right. Well, I haven't seen any other comments come in or any questions, so so I guess we'll wrap up a little bit early today. So, Leslie, thank you so much for your time and sharing that information.
It's my pleasure, and I'll be happy to talk with anyone later should a question arise or you want to know more about our experience here.
I do have one comment here. Sharon, who's the director at the Northlake Public Library here in Illinois, she said that they did an Indiegogo project to purchase graphic novels and equipment.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
that's very exciting.
Yeah, that's a great use, and that's similar to some of the kinds of things I've seen when I've looked for those types of projects in a library.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Sharon. All right. Well, okay, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. And thank you again, Leslie. Really appreciate your time. And thank you all for attending today. As I mentioned, Leslie gave permission for us to record, so we'll be posting this on the Rails website very soon. So thanks again, Leslie, and everybody have a great day.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.